What's going on, guys? It's illumignostic, and we're doing an AMA tonight. I have some questions that were asked that I'm going to start out with. I see you guys have already got the chat moving right along, which is super cool. I apologize if the audio is not what it used to be or normally is, or whatever. The microphone broke today, so I'll have to go get another one tomorrow. Okay, so where should we start? I guess probably with I see some interesting questions about morality in there, which is, I think, a much easier topic than students of philosophy might suggest. It's really not so difficult, and I think that our confusion regarding morality comes from indoctrination, and it comes from people that are serving selective interests, and at any rate, we'll get there. So the first question that I wanted to answer is that people ask me, what is the best thing about being a facilitator, an ayahuasca or plant medicine facilitator, and what is the worst thing? And you know, it's the answer, what is the best thing, just sounds so generic and predictable that it is, one moment please. Enrica, the taxi's here! He said he was going to be 10 minutes and it was only 2. So yeah, I mean, getting to help people, you know, but it's not just helping people. To me, I have always, ever since I was a very small child, somehow had this drive to show people what seemed obvious to me and seemed so elusive to most of the rest of the people around me. And that is just that there is this, it's not even a hidden dimension of reality to me. It's just the fact of the living universe, that, you know, I feel like as like a second grader or maybe even younger, you know, I realized that all of the religions clearly were ridiculous and incorrect by and large, and that people tended to have these belief systems based on their geographical location. You know, it's just the people around them determine it's cultural, you know, it's just cultural. And it blew my mind that people didn't realize that themselves, because it's just right there, right in front of your face, bright and luminescent and deafeningly or blinding in its brightness. You know, it's just right there. So, you know, and I also had to contend with a lot of hatred because I wasn't Christian. Where I grew up, there were tons and tons of fundamentalist redneck Christian types, and they did not like it if you were not Christian. It was not a good position to take. Didn't make you popular. So, you know, it resulted in fights, discrimination, alienation. I mean, from as early as I can remember too, you know, children on the playground for sure, all the way up to high school. You know, I hope it's not as bad for people out there today, but the bullet point of this presentation is basically that it really drove me, because I wasn't religious, but I also wasn't an atheist. And I didn't understand why that was so uncommon, why it was that people only seemed to be capable of adopting a prefabricated set of like religious or spiritual beliefs. You know, I mean, it seemed like the Buddhists were about as free from the dogma and the, you know, the mind manacles of religion as you could get, but they still basically were, you know, trapped in a dogma, in a mick religion that was created by someone else, and there are barbs in it, you know, it's not entirely good. So yeah, for me, the main reason that I feel compelled to encourage people to take psychedelics is that I feel that it offers direct experience of what a lot of people call gnosis, this direct subjective experience of a living universe. And lots of miraculous things start to happen. Your relationship with life, with the universe, takes on greater depth. And it's far more interesting and it's much more interactive. People experience synchronicities. If you have the mental perspacity, the acuity, the willpower and determination to actually take initiation and progress to the degree that you can comprehend advanced metaphysics, which is actually a thing, you discover that it's not just a bunch of gibberish. It's not just, you know, it's not muddle-headed mystics just making shit up. There actually is a living language of symbolism, for example, that the Pythagoreans talked about, like, the strange sovereignty of number. For example, that's another element of this. The holographic nature of the universe, that actually, we associate that kind of idea with somebody like Terence and Dennis McKenna in the 90s. But the reality is that it goes all the way back at least to the Pythagoreans. I'm going to talk about that before this is over. And give you guys, somebody asked me for a guitar lesson today, so instead what I'm going to do is offer a little bit of insight into what I call functional numerology, which is not the type of numerology where you just like trust some new age housewife that she has intuited the real meanings of numbers and that type of numerology, but numerology that is actually based on function and property and characteristics of the numbers, which are living entities, according to certain ontologies. And so, yeah, for me, honestly, beyond healing trauma, that's all great and wonderful. But what I really get the most out of is just to watch someone's materialist, worldview just crumble in a split second. I've seen all kinds of remarkable things where people have scoffed at something I've said during a Zoom call, and then they're here drinking ayahuasca 2 weeks later, and they're not scoffing anymore. In this particular case, what I'm thinking of is evolution, and how, a few weeks earlier I had told this client who became a friend that, do you really think that evolution is blind and random? And he said, actually, yeah, I do think that. And he was kind of offended and insulted because it was sort of like I was looking down on this belief that he had. And like an hour into ayahuasca, I mentioned it, and he said, what? I don't think that. And I said, you scoffed at me. Oh, yeah. Well, I don't think that anymore. It literally took an hour for his whole worldview to just completely sort of unravel and then reformat. And so, for me, that's absolutely the best part of it. The worst part is when you get personally involved with people, and it's, narcissism is a very common psychological aberration at the current juncture in our culture, along with a whole host of other things. But there are two things that happen that are pretty bad, that I really hate. One of them is when someone has severe trauma and they lie about it. It's usually because it's sexual and they're embarrassed, or it involves incest, as in the worst case that I experienced. When someone has experienced incestuous sexual abuse from the time they're an infant, this is not a person that you give a high dose of medicine in a group setting. I would not do that. But I was lied to and told that the person had lots of experience. Later I found out that the shaman who had given the previous medicine, he told me, like, directly to my face that he serves tourist medicine, which is a terminology that is used to describe medicine that is very weak, and it is served, but he's a good shaman. He's not, he has good intentions. He's definitely knows what he's doing. But he serves very weak medicine, at least at first, to protect himself, basically, from situations like this. And so she insisted she had lots of experience, which turned out to be weak tourist medicine. And she told me she had no severe traumas. She had drank strong medicine many times. Well, turns out that she didn't know what strong medicine was, and that she had had this severe trauma and completely lost her mind for the next 12 hours. And of course, that completely detracts from my ability to pay attention to the rest of the group. Luckily, everyone else was totally fine. So that sucks if that happens. Always tell your facilitator the truth. They're not there to judge you. They're there to help you. In fact, if I have information regarding specific types of trauma, I can offer admixture plants like Bobinsana to help with emotional trauma. I can give you tobacco to aid in focus and to help deal with anger problems and fear. You have to be honest with your facilitator. And then the other thing that is the worst part is when it's someone that you have developed a personal relationship with, and oftentimes if you force them to confront some aspect of themselves that they want to remain in denial about, they will turn on you viciously. And that's happened to me twice, where the person just, at one of them had a tendency to become threatening and violent, or at least threatening violence, not actual violence, but threatening, implying violence. And then I would say, hey, are you aware that you're doing this? And then he would act like he had no idea what I was talking about. And it was true. He had developed the ability to slip in and out of his conscious and subconscious because he had lived an entire life where he was totally oblivious to his subconscious, and actually later told me he believed he didn't have one. And probably still to this day, he believes that I was just, I don't know what, but he probably still is of the opinion that it was just something about me, absolutely he would do this thing, but he refused to believe it. And it eventually caused a rift in our relationship because I can't back down. And another thing to consider is that the facilitator, I do drink medicine with people, but I take a fraction of what they take. So my level of awareness is, much more clear. That's the point. That's always really disappointing when, people just aren't ready to let go of a certain aspect of their personality, and they choose to not undermine, but, the language is escaping me, but you follow me. They just sort of go after you rather than dealing with whatever issue it is that you've shed light on where they didn't want to look. Okay, so what else did I say that I was going to talk about here? So, someone asked me to talk about what to do when you're feeling really apathetic and you are having trouble remaining motivated. And it was a really interestingly serendipitous time to ask me that question because I've been actually struggling with that myself. I was very ill for like 3 years, and I didn't really realize it until I started drinking medicine again, which I should have just done the whole time. It really would have, it was a huge mistake. But I just felt so bad that I couldn't bring myself to do it until fairly recently, and that's actually what got my life moving again, of course, right? So, the point being, during that time, I lost a lot of years. I lost interest in music. I lost interest more or less in metaphysics, although for me that's not actually really possible. This ties into the flow state integration process that I'm going to talk about in this video, which it's been such a tremendous revelation, and I'm so glad that I happened to watch this video because I didn't realize that I had trained myself for this. But let's one thing at a time. I've been struggling with that as well. I used to be obsessed with playing the guitar and music, and I was ferocious with it. A certain kind of energy came from the music that I played, and it had the same effect on people that psychedelics do. People told me this all the time, and of course that was infinitely rewarding because that is this like really, really abstract objective that I had to have this very specific effect on people. And you know, it's not something I'm vocalizing. Oftentimes my band, we didn't have any lyrics, and when we did, we usually weren't singing directly, much like the Grateful Dead, right? They were singing about cowboys and whatever, gambling and just stuff, and still the audience received the very specific message. Um, so, you know, for me to lose my connection sort of with all of this stuff from being ill for years took more of a toll on me than I realized. So I started thinking, like, how can I accelerate my, um, you know, reintegration of my enthusiasm, a rediscovery of my enthusiasm, and how can I maintain, you know, after I drink medicine one night, I of course feel better for a few days. I'm invigorated, to some extent, maybe inspired again, but that will always kind of wane. And this is one of the big issues with psychedelics. They are phenomenal catalysts, and the changes that they engender or catalyze, um, they are very often lasting. In fact, one of the most difficult aspects of the research that's been done is the incredulity of the psychiatric community, the scientific community, and the sort of the consumers, that psychedelics can have the kind of impact that they can have in a single dose, right? That's one of those things that it's almost just too much for people to believe. But you know, in spite of that, there is still a necessity for integration. We still have to take personal responsibility for maximizing our gains from these experiences, for making investitures of these spiritual experiences, and we need to maintain momentum when we achieve these states of neuroplasticity and we have catalyzed neurogenesis to 1,000 times its normal rate. We need to maintain that, and you know, for most of us, drinking ayahuasca 2 or 3 times a week for the rest of our lives is not very practical. So there are other ways. So what I've been looking at is the diets and the supplements and the um, activities that enhance dopamine production. And this has to be done properly, right? If you just, it's just like serotonin. If you take a bunch of MDMA and you dump all the serotonin, you may actually have, it's not that you crash, actually. A study was just done. It's not that you crash because you've had this huge serotonin dump, and then you crash. That's actually not true. One study decided that it was just that Monday comes after weekends, and people usually take MDMA on the weekends. My light just died, so I apologize for that. But the point being that the you know, the acute effects of this enhanced determination and enthusiasm can wane, and we have to maintain that. And so, just like with the serotonin, serotonergic compounds like MDMA and LSD, where you know, if you just take a bunch of this stuff and then you don't do anything to support it afterwards, you can have a peak and valley experience that's sort of like being manic depressive or something. It's not ideal. So there are ways to sort of stage your dopamine increases so that they're consistent and yeah, consistent. That's the main thing. And then so the other aspect of this, aside from taking responsibility for your dopamine levels, and for those of you that don't know, dopamine is not really about reward. It's more about motivation. And so that's really what you need when you have these sort of peak experiences, that you need to maintain that homeostasis and to continue on that new level and not allow yourself to descend back into monotony and monotheism and monogamy. I'm sorry, that's Terrence McKenna. The monogamy thing, I'm not so sure is such a nightmare. For me, it's fine, but certainly monotheism and monotony are not really great. So yeah, the dopamine diet, and I'm not going to go huge into detail about this because you guys can do your own research, and also I'm going to make videos where I'm going to go into depth about all of this, and we have quite a few topics to get to tonight. So there's that, and then there's flow state integration. And this brings us also to the subject of mysticism. The One of the things that I realized about mysticism and flow state, or having any kind of spiritual practice in flow state, is that there is an overlap. And when we think about flow state, we think about a guitarist improvising and suddenly he's just playing supernaturally amazing things that are just impossible and moving, and he's not thinking. I mean, when it happens to me, I don't know where I'm at even. I mean, I have literally found myself soaked in sweat on stage, and I'm looking around the room literally thinking, like, what are all these people doing in my bedroom? Because I think I'm waking up in bed. I'm not even kidding. I mean, it's that much of an altered state, and I'm talking with no help from anything, just totally sober and entering that deeply into an altered state, and all kinds of crazy things happen. I have looked down at my hand and told it to play a certain riff, and it's just gone in the other direction down the neck and played something better. Like, totally defied my conscious directives and just done whatever it wanted to, and it was way better than I ever could have imagined. So, and we think about BMX, guys flipping in the air, and, athletes and that type of thing. But what I realized about myself is that I had just intuited how to sort of engineer my life so that I was always in flow state. And there are a couple of fundamental practices that are going to allow this. Part of what it is concentration. There are like these prerequisites to enter into flow state, right? And I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but concentration is one of them. And because my mind has been so focused on this one track of metaphysics and decoding the great cosmic mystery, I've always focused on the same track. So I had that sort of flow state as sort of a natural aspect of my personality. And because I was so driven and so determined, mastery is another aspect of the flow state. So I was constantly looking for adjuncts and tributaries, right, to connect to. And because my interests sort of encompassed so many different subjects, it was really easy for me to constantly be absorbing, from physics, from systems of mysticism, from music, from, all of these things have layers of them that connect back to this metaphysical mission. So one of the aspects of flow state, for example, that you will hear a lot about is that intuition is dramatically increased. Like, before a thing happens that it's going to happen, and you've reacted before you could think. It's really like, you see this on basketball courts. If you're really listening to the Grateful Dead's group improvisations, you'll hear this sort of thing happen. And so intuition is greatly increased. Well, so flow state and mysticism, right? Because that's the other type of person that you hear has this like increased intuition. And what else do people that have spiritual practice generally work on? Mindfulness, which is what? Concentration, okay? And so it turns out that one of the side effects, to bring dopamine back into the conversation, is that dopamine enhances pattern recognition. And so when we're talking about intuition, and if you consider that everything in the universe are these repetitive patterns, that, people like Maynard James Keenan from Tool, when asked about his ability to precognize COVID with the Fear Inoculum album, just said, the subconscious mind is always mapping these patterns and can extend those patterns out into the future sometimes, and that's how this stuff kind of happens. It's not really that mystical. It's just about being able to recognize patterns. So all of these things that enhance dopamine production enhances the pattern recognition. So you have this sort of double whammy, this reinforcement of the objective of maintaining the flow state, maintaining your momentum through maintaining your motivation, which is largely what the dopamine is for. And so this is the thing, you guys, and I'm going to make videos about this. I'm working on making this like a regular part of our retreats, that after the retreats, you know, I'll work with you to help you maintain flow state after the fact and to enhance your dopamine production, so that after you leave the retreat, you're able to just continue sailing at that super high altitude that people, you know, will often experience for days, weeks, even months after a plant medicine ceremony. So I'm super excited about that. And even without plant medicine, you know, this is something that you guys can do. You know, exercise increases dopamine, and there are certain foods that you can eat that will inhibit the production, and there are certain foods that will encourage the production. So do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon if you would like to join our secret streams. We had one today, and the music and numerology, it's gonna be dense, you guys. You gotta bear with me. It's gonna be worth it, but you're really gonna have to put your thinking cap on to make it through it. Especially if you're a musician, it'll be a little bit easier. But and this is for a patron actually that asked me to do a guitar lesson. I'm starting a music channel, so I don't want to put guitar lessons on this channel. But I will when I have more videos on the music channel, I'll put the link in the subscriber area, or the, you know, the community post place. So yeah, flow integration, dopamine enhancement. What were we on to there? Let me look at my little list. Okay, so I think we have that one sewn up pretty well. Okay, so I guess I was saying that some foods will detract or inhibit dopamine, and some will increase. And then, you know, exercise and sex and careful use of tobacco. Like I said, I don't want to get into the details, but that's basically the answer. You know, if you're having trouble maintaining your lust for life, all of the things that lead to flow state, plus flow state itself, but not flow state restricted to a specific activity, but flow state as a state of being, is what we are after in this case, and it's supported by the dopamine enhancement. So, man, you guys hear this stuff? I really think this new protocol, man, I'm feeling like we're really gonna get some serious evolution happening, some rut evolution. You know, Nam Myo Ring Q, MDMA is one of the best drugs. I am not, you know, a hippie. I don't think that these things necessarily have to be 100% natural. I love LSD. I think it's an amazing compound. And MDMA does things that none of these other compounds do as well, right? With all psychedelic medicine, there's overlap. So, you know, mescaline is good for all of the things that MDMA is good for, but MDMA is way better than mescaline at a lot of things like PTSD. And another thing that I've noticed about MDMA is that when you make a decision during an MDMA session, your likelihood of follow through is very, very high compared to even LSD or psilocybin or something. So, you know, all of these compounds have their applications. They're more efficacious for certain applications than other compounds. And of course, you know, if you actually have the discipline and willpower, the determination to use these things in an adjunct or adjunctively with, you know, a real determination to maintain high dopamine levels and to learn flow state as a way of life and not just a sort of peak experience during an activity, you know, the sky's not even the limit. The sky, interdimensionality is not the limit. You know, unity consciousness is not the limit. Okay, so this guitar lesson thing. This we're just going to totally veer off into numerology and mysticism now, but in sort of a different way. Our secret streams for the patrons for like a month because it's such a long degree. So I've been choosing a different degree from the book Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, the 33rd degree commander of the Southern Jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in the United States. The book was published for the first time in 1851, and it is definitely not supposed to be in the hands of the profane. I literally dreamed that it was on a bookshelf, told my girlfriend what book we were going to get so that I had a witness in case it actually turned out to be true, drove down to the used bookstore, pulled it right off the shelf where it was in the dream, and so I'm using that copy of that book to kind of guide as we go through the degrees, certain degrees of Freemasonry, and kind of talk about what's being taught. And this degree 28, Knight of the Sun or Prince Adept, is chock full of amazing food for thought. And so we, in the last couple of secret streams, have been dealing with Pythagorean numerology. So there is, for example, an imaginary conversation between Pythagoras and an initiate about each number up to 10. And then he starts just breaking down the numerological significance of 1, 2, 3, again, all the way up to 10. And what really strikes me as interesting, and this is something I noticed a long time ago, but I got further insight into it today, because that's the way this real mystical contemplation works. You will continue to pull new stuff out of old material for the rest of eternity. It's just, when it's really legitimate, when it's coming from that deep rabbit hole place, like Aleister Crowley's Book of Lies, so falsely called, you can read that, put it down for 6 months, read it again. Everything has a whole new layer. If you've progressed in your spiritual development, put it down, pick it up 6 months later, read it again. It will never stop. The Kabbalion probably is like that as well. You know, there's certain texts and certain ideas that never stop. You can always sort of harvest new layers of meaning and extricate and extrapolate all of this, all of these new revelations over time. So you have the musical scale, right? And you have degrees. So the key that you're in, say you're in the key of C, that's the 1. That's the first note. So you have 7 notes, 8 if you include the octave. Okay, so 1 is home. So if you go to the 7th note in the scale and you play it, it wants to return to the 1, right? It wants to go back to the 1. If you play the 2, it wants to go back to the 1. If you play a 5 chord, it wants to go back to the 1 chord, right? So everything is pulling back to the 1. And usually you start in a song, not always, but usually on the 1 chord, and you end on the 1 chord. So alpha and omega. And the 1 is the unity, right? This is God, basically. This is the source. And so it follows the explanation of the numerological significance exactly. So the second degree of the scale, if you build a chord on it, it's minor. So it's the introduction of sadness, of division, of disunity, right? And it's extremely dissonant against the 1, so we have disharmony now. Really, just it's really crazy. And then the third, the ternary, is was considered the number of harmony, and indeed, in functional harmony, the 3rd note of the scale determines whether a chord or a scale is major or minor, happy or sad. So it is indeed Lord of harmony, right? So 5 is the number of cycles, and the 5 chord typically is the one that returns us to the 1. So the cycle's over, we're returning home. It's really something else. So here's where it gets really crazy, though. When we get to the number 6, and so 6 is considered by the Pythagoreans to be the first perfect number, because its constituent parts 1, 2, and 3 create it, right? It contains all of its individual units. And so there's an indication or a suggestion of the holographic nature of the universe, okay? But in music, the 6 is the inversion of the 1. It's the dark reflection of God. So the number 6 has this association with the devil, right? And if you take the 6 and you move it up an octave, it becomes a 13. So the number still has this association with the devil. But even more interesting, if you look at it from a sort of Gnostic perspective, this idea that the 1 exploded into the multitude, right? And the Hermetic idea that the 1 is in the all. So all these little parts of God are everywhere, and they contain the whole, and then, the whole is all of these holographic parts. That idea is embodied in this idea of the number 6 containing all of its constituent parts. And so it's like the 1 is the original unity, and then the 6 is the exploded deity in its manifestation as the demiurgos in its holographic illusion, its dark reflection in matter, right? And then 8 is the octave, and the octave is the same as the 1, but it's higher. It's oscillating higher. If you turn the 8 on its side, it's of course the infinity symbol. So we have correlations, again, that are very eerie. So the number that is associated with Jesus is 8. So Jesus is this manifestation of God that is on a higher cycle than the older manifestation of that same God, right? So Jehovah was jealous and wrathful and turning people into pillars of salt and, just murdering babies and all of this stuff. And then there's an emanation later of a higher cycle, right? The number 8, that is that God, but cycling higher. Another way to think about it is the idea of quantum, it's not quantum entanglement, it's quantum loop theory, where the universe is constantly, there's a singularity, and then it creates all of these, every possible possibility that it can create without violating any natural laws. And then once that happens, the light is sort of consuming itself, the Ouroboros is eating its own tail, but it actually collapses back in. But once it reaches a certain point, the energy has condensed so much that it explodes again. And each time it's the same universe, so you're not really reincarnated. You're going to be the same person over and over and over again, but each time in a more and more progressively perfect universe. Progressively more perfect version of the same universe. So again, it's that God, right? Because God is the all, it's creation, it's all of the universe. So the 1, and then it collapses, right, into a tighter vibration, which is that 8, that original creation cycling higher. And this happens for all of infinity. And so the infinity symbol being there, I hope you guys followed that. I think I did a better job of explaining it earlier, but that is, if you follow it, it's really quite remarkable. So there's your guitar lesson. So what else? Hola. Let's see, what else? The guitar lesson, innovations, integration protocol, we did that. Numerology and music, importance of dopamine support. Okay, so I think that was all of the questions that I had received prior to starting, and then I said I would go through the chat. And I see this Mark Passio claims that there is a correlation between the level of freedom humanity experiences and the level of morality it is aware of and adheres to. The more morality, the more freedom. However, after a year of being vegan, I've concluded that yes, morality wins the debate and moral obligations are clearly defined. In my opinion, veganism is it's like a condition. It's I am not in favor of veganism at all. My experience with vegans and vegan communities over the last couple of years has been absolutely horrific. I have never met a more pretentious, pompous, holier than thou group of people with lower self-awareness, and it's supposed to be all about that. I mean, I realize all vegans aren't like that, but this is sort of definitely the standard, that vegans are. I mean, I could tell you guys stories that would burn off your ears. So I don't know what your correlation is between veganism and morality, but I don't see it. I don't understand the reference even. Um, I'm sorry, I don't get it. But the question of morality. One of the things that I've noticed over the years, and one of the reasons that I do what I do, is that and it's not like I'm the only person that's ever noticed this, but when people experience genuine gnosis, when they eat magic mushrooms and have a spiritual experience, right? They have a transcendental experience. This changes people. And, you know, a lot of people argue, like, okay, well, I've met people that eat acid that are still douchebags. And, like, sure, but can you imagine what they would have been like if they'd never had any contact with any psychedelic? You know what I mean? I see those people that are still awful after taking psychedelics, but I still think they're at least going to be more interesting than they were otherwise. And generally, I think they are a little bit better, even if it didn't, like, heal them and turn them into Buddhistic saints or whatever it is that we're expecting from these compounds. There's still usually a huge improvement. But it doesn't have to be psychedelics either. You know, I mean, you see monks, they're generally nonviolent. They have goodwill towards other people. They're certainly trying to just relax and live their life and not, you know, harm anyone and not be harmed. So, you know, I've always kind of been of the opinion that under optimal circumstances, without undue influence from self-interested people, humans do gravitate towards a sort of spiritual, emotional, and intellectual homeostasis, where absolute freedom can be allowed. It's like the Comte de Phoenix said, the absolute freedom of the individual is a product of the absolute sovereignty of the state is determined by the absolute sovereignty of the individual. The caveat, of course, is that until a certain state of mind has been attained by the individual, they cannot really be trusted with that sovereignty, and they don't really deserve it. So it is kind of a difficult situation. It's kind of a catch 29 or 22, whatever that terminology is, where, you know, I do believe that the state of mind is possible where people generally can be, you know, I say oftentimes that people that have genuinely experienced gnosis and have committed their lives to the pursuit of that path in general, the path of light, we could call it, we don't need to be governed and refuse to be governed. You know, I don't answer to anyone. I won't answer to anyone. There's no reason for me to answer to anyone. I won't steal from you. I'm not going to attack you. You know what I mean? I feel like if I can help you, I will, as long as it's not, like, you know, too detrimental to my own journey. And I think that that sort of attitude arises naturally when certain organic processes have been catalyzed within the individual. And yeah, so there's, you know, all of this stuff is sort of contingent upon certain circumstances, but it is our job as illuminated people to try and to create the circumstances that are conducive to the world that we want to see. And it may seem impossible, but, you know, like last night, for example, I was talking about the Bannister effect, which was this athlete that was the first person to run a 4-minute mile. It had been believed impossible until he did it. And as soon as he did it, people started doing it all the time. And so, you know, I think that we have, just as we have individual psychological blocks, we have collective blind spots and we have collective blocks. And once we are able to dissolve those blocks in the individual, we have a collective mind, and so they are eroded in that collective mind when the individual does it. So uh, all we can really do is do our own work to the best of our ability and watch the ripple in still water when there is no pebble toss nor wind to blow, but yet still an effect. You know what I mean? You will see the manifestation of your own work in the external world around you. So let's see if we have any more questions. And morality does not lead to unnecessary judgment, overreactions, divisions, social turmoil. It doesn't lead to any of that stuff. What leads to that stuff is people trying to conform to doctrines. People that those are not products of morality. Those are all products of ego. And you know, a moral population doesn't do any of those things. It's a population that has the delusion of morality, and what they actually have is you know, cultural mandates that they're adhering to, narratives, and so they feel that they are exemplary and refined and sophisticated and you know, holier than thou because of their capacity to engage in herd conformity, which to me is absolutely just pathetic and despicable. And it results in all of the things that you're talking about here. And usually what happens is that once the idiots are fascinated and the intelligent are muzzled, you know, the catastrophes of fascism and, you know, these horrendous historical blunders, to put it mildly, you know, the stage is set for them. And I think we're living in one such circumstance, and it's due to a pervasive, ubiquitous, even cultural narrative that is a actual pseudo morality. It just because people, you know, there are a lot of people out there, for example, that believe that if something is legal, that means it's ethical, and that is such a dangerous position to take, right? So it's that kind of pseudo moralistic stance that leads to all of the shit that you listed there. It's not real morality. You know, even if we look at self-interest as a guidepost, as our primary motivating factor, it's still generally, in the context of a modern civilization, more even distribution of wealth and resources is actually going to benefit the individual much more than the current pseudo-moralistic, unbridled capitalism that we are currently engaging in. Yeah, and the thing is, I think that the changes that need to be made in terms of how we do business and how we think of economic freedom, for 99% of people, or let's say 85% of people, to be liberal, the changes would not affect you. Actually, they would, but they would be positive. And they would not be detrimental to the few that are above that line. So it really is just a travesty of indoctrination and brainwashing, that we have these pseudo-moralistic narratives, cultural narratives, and you know, political and economic systems that are actually built on false pseudo-moralistic narratives. Yeah, and Osmatar is saying that inherent nihilism springs from moral decay. That's absolutely, you know, our biggest. I just talked to a guy that's considering coming to the retreats today about this very thing. You know, um, video game addictions, even the fact that, you know, we have, I saw a Twitch streamer one time get $1 million donation for playing video games. Like, that's where our priority is. It is so meaningful for people to divert their attention from the actual grandiose mystery, the grandeur of actual the actual living universe, to somehow create tunnel vision that precludes the perception of the multitude of miracles that are flying around their head, and to focus on a video game. This is the result of a crisis of purpose, and it is also the reason why we have school shootings. It is the reason why we have testable levels of Xanax in the oceans. Like, if you piss test the oceans, they test positive for Xanax. There are rivers in London that test positive for cocaine in a standard drug test, and this is why it's a crisis of purpose. And the gnosis, whether it's derived from psychedelics or some other means, resolves that crisis of purpose, because it tells us that we are a splinter of the sentience that is the fabric of the universe, the creator itself, after a fashion. And so we know that our purpose is to create, to observe, to experience, to live, love, and experience joy and suffering and die and all of that. And just, I think, knowing that we are a splinter of this experiential reflecting aperture of the deity itself is enough to restore some sort of sense of purpose to people. And it is definitely the abject materialist, deterministic, rational, not that being rational is bad, but rationalism taken to its extremes, reductionism, excuse me. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely, Osmatar. No, Shane, I don't think that there's a point where you're becoming too moral becomes detrimental. I think that your definition of moral is maybe a bit too broad. When people have morality that is not based on anything substantive, when it is imposed by authority, whether that authority is the church or government or whatever other societal institution it is, then you have a capacity to adhere too closely to some moral dogma that's going to restrict your experience, that's going to cause you to impede the joy and creativity of other people. But in a Gnostic sense, in a neo-Gnostic sense, and an illuminated sense, however you want to think about it, the way that I think about it, the lines are very simple. If you have not obstructed the will of another, then there is no moral grievance, and you're within your rights. You have no right but to do thy will. You know, you determine what your highest purpose is, what it is that you are here to achieve and experience on this plane, and you dedicate every aspect of your life to maintaining a flow state, tons of dopamine, and the singular pursuit of this one thing. And then there will be no disharmony and no dissonance. There is no conflict, because when the morality is not imposed by artificial structures, when it's not pseudo morality, then the laws of nature are not violated, right? And the kingdom can act in accordance with its own organic ingenium, and do as thou wilt is the whole of the law under those circumstances. Huh, interesting that the audio sounds good. Okay, because my mic broke, and I guess that was an improvement, so that's good. Mr. Charles, I don't know how old these comments are in the chat, but I did get pretty deeply into your question about motivation and being apathetic, hesitant, fearful, sluggish, all of that. So you might have to go back through the live stream and find it, but I certainly did do my best to address all that. Do narc type experiences benefit from the medicine? I have never in my life seen someone actually get an effect from ayahuasca, and that's the thing. It is possible. Ayahuasca is a very subtle medicine. It's really extraordinary, and I hope I'm not going to be too clumsy trying to explain this, but because of it's everything contains its contradiction, right? So this is a psychedelic that is so powerful that it makes LSD look like aspirin, but at the same time, it's so subtle that you can resist it to the degree that nothing happens, and it's nothing but your resistance stopping it. You cannot do that with LSD. If you take a 10 strip of LSD, you're going on a 10 strip of LSD ride, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's gonna happen. It's like, well, I shouldn't say that. He's dead. I was gonna say it's like sex with Kobe Bryant, but that's distasteful, I guess. Anyways, and it's also stolen from the Chappelle Show, so don't get mad at me. It wasn't my idea. But yeah, so if they actually have an experience, I don't think it's possible to go into the DMT realm and see that, whether it's DMT or Changa or ayahuasca, and to have these beings come up to you and have these exchanges with them, and then just go, okay, well, I'm back to my matrix mind, normal, mundane reality. I don't think you can do that. I think that if you see people doing that, it's because they went to shamans that are just trying to make money, and they're serving people tourist medicine that doesn't have enough DMT in it to freak them out so that they don't have to worry about it. And that's generally the case anymore. Most of the people that you meet that think they have gone to a retreat and drank ayahuasca did not really have money. If you really speak with them, compared to what happens if you drink ayahuasca the way that I prepare it, usually it's not it's mostly vine, and it doesn't have a lot of the DMT. To be fair, a lot of those facilitators will allow people to have a second and third cup, and in the case where people do pursue the full effect, oftentimes I think they get there. But point being, with the standard, industry standard dose of ayahuasca, most of the people that think they've experienced it actually haven't, based on my conversations with them. But yeah, no, I don't think that it's not possible to remain the same no matter what experience you have. Every step in a person's journey extends their empire, and there's really no way, I don't think, to make it through an ayahuasca experience with the same mentality that you had prior to entering into it. But I haven't seen everything and everyone, and there's an exception to every rule, so I'm sure that guy's out there somewhere. I have not seen it, for my part. Any more questions, guys? There's another thing I've been thinking about. Worst situation, coming a friend told me I was being an ass, and after I asked her to tell me when I was being... Yeah, taking MDMA every day is probably not the best thing. I don't know if you're still here, Nam. You have to allow your serotonin to reset. Serotonergic compounds will deplete the neurotransmitters that you are... you only make so much in a certain period of time, so you don't really want to throw these systems out of whack. Microdosing MDMA is not really... probably going to work out in the long run. And I don't know that it's necessary. I mean, you should be able to retain some degree of what you have gained from the experience over a period of weeks. Or, I mean, the first time I took MDMA, I decided I was going to go to school for information systems technology, and I actually followed through and did it. and that's, you know, my experience generally. So I don't really think that it's necessary, and I'm certain that it's probably not the best plan. Do me a favor, you guys. I know I've said this at least once, but this is probably a new group by now. So we're demonetized. We get no money for doing these streams and making the videos. So support us if you like the content. There are options in the description and in the chat for PayPal and Zelle, and for cryptocurrency. And we have an Etsy shop with some t-shirts, and you can come to our retreats in Ecuador, where we can take you to see local shaman and shamana like Mama Celia, who is an amazing Quechua woman who she didn't even know what a town was until she was 17 years old. We can also travel to visit Shuar shaman. We can drink here. There's also a lot of outdoor activities. There are squirrel monkeys, and there is an island where friendly tapirs, which is kind of like a rhino horse sort of pig monster, but they're sweet. Will walk right up to you sometimes. Squirrel monkeys. If you saw a lighter monkey on TikTok, when it went viral last year, lighter monkey lives here with his troop. There are lagoons with anacondas and caiman and howler monkeys and spider monkeys, and there's an awful lot to do. It's really amazing. So if you're looking for a retreat to go to, also I teach you how to make medicine, and also about a lot of the different medicinal plants that come from the jungle that are not psychoactive, and also show you what you can eat in case World War III happens and you need to come down to the jungle and survive, which is not hard at all. There's food everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Yeah, so you can support us by coming to a retreat, or you can make a one-time contribution or join our Patreon. We really do appreciate it, having been demonetized long time ago. Just scanning for questions. There's an awful lot of interaction here. You know, actually, Kensho, natural psychedelics are not necessarily better to use. It depends on your objective. LSD is actually the most efficacious at treating a whole bunch of things than any of the other compounds, and it catalyzes more neurogenesis than DMT, psilocybin, harmaline, any of them. So for certain applications like accelerating learning and enhancing memory, none of them beat LSD. And it's non-toxic, it's non-addictive, it's, you know, make sure it's really LSD, but I don't think. Plus, you know, LSD, if it's really LSD, is semi-synthetic. It's like half natural. It's the one time that nature and man work together to create something, and actually, it's not the one time, but it's one of the times that nature and man work together to do something that actually worked out. Chamomile is just as good as Xanax. I mean, back in my partying days, I think Xanax probably worked a hell of a lot better than chamomile if I needed landing gear, but I do see where you're going with that, I guess. Oh, and also the other thing about the retreats I didn't mention is that we do, I teach Hermetic magic, ritual magic, lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram and whatnot. And it's a style of magic that, you know, if you don't believe in magic, it's still beneficial as like a very sophisticated form of meditation. I think the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram is one of the most powerful tools you can possibly have in your disposal. Ketamine was a brilliant act of cooperation as well, except that ketamine is fully synthetic. So it's not as much of an act of cooperation as LSD. It's just totally fucking fake. But it actually, it saved my ass. I mean, it's, you know, ketamine is a miracle for people that have an opiate addiction because you can walk right out of it. You know, and people get really mad at me for saying that. I actually had a couple of friends unfriend me and block me on Facebook for saying, you know, promo just posting clinical studies on ketamine because they've seen so many wooks and other forms of brain dead hippie that have just abused it. But you know, that mentality's never made any sense to me. You can cut your own face off with a chainsaw, but it's got nothing to do with the chainsaw if that's how you use the chainsaw. Okay, so if you guys have more questions, you need to format them and put them in the chat because I feel like I've gone through them and addressed them. For those of you that are just tuning in, I think the first 30 minutes or so of this were probably, especially where I was talking about my new approach to integration with trying to build, to structure our lives, to engineer our lives so that flow state is a way of life and not just something that's restricted to certain peak experiences with certain activities and dopamine enhancement following plant medicine experiences. So that is definitely something to check out. Ibogaine for heroin and morphine withdrawal is also miraculous. It's probably even better than ketamine because ketamine just sort of like disassociates you from the withdrawals for some period of time, and it keeps the withdrawals at bay beyond the acute phase of withdrawal, or the acute intoxication, excuse me. So that means that once the actual acute drug effect of ketamine has worn off, you still have 5 or 6 hours that you can sleep and that the withdrawal is not going to affect you. So you understand what I'm saying? It's not just while you're high on ketamine that you're not experiencing withdrawal. It actually does keep it at bay. But Ibogaine actually will you just have no withdrawal and you actually can just walk right out of an addiction, which, you know, for most people, that's all that's keeping them in heroin or opiate addiction. The original trauma that compelled them to engage in these addictive behaviors in the first place does need to be resolved. But in most cases, I think it's the horrific withdrawals that I have definitely experienced myself in the past that keep them trapped. And so having a compound that can actually allow you to walk out of it without having to contend with that is extraordinary. The thing is, of course, you have to make sure there's no Ibogaine or there's no heroin or opiates in your system when you take Ibogaine because you will die. And I've always kind of explained it like there are two forces that are so powerful. The battle that they are going to engage in is too much for your mortal frame and you will just break and die. So don't do that. What are your other two questions? Where are they in the chat? I mean, I saw something about your friend. I didn't understand the question. It's not that I didn't see it. I didn't understand. Hi, Mr. Charles' mom. That's great that your mom has joined us for the stream. Yeah, I'm looking for your other questions. I'll totally answer them, of course. If by the way, you guys, thank you so much for your support. It has been very rough for us. The protest that the indigenous did, they shut down the entire country, so our guests got turned around and sent back to the United States, and some people canceled. So we really just got torpedoed. And then there was an unfortunate incident with a mayonnaise bottle and a flat screen TV that created further hardship for us. So we really do appreciate you supporting the channel right now. It's difficult for everyone out there. But man, in the last like 30 days, we've really gotten our asses kicked. Yeah. Can you just type the question again, I guess? I'm happy to try to deal with it if I can. I mean, video games are a complete waste of time. You get killed, start over, and make it a little further next time. Aren't you Buddhist? Isn't that exactly what Buddhists think happens? How did your wife feel about the whole prison thing? I mean, once she understood what happened, it wasn't so bad. But you know, when she didn't know what happened, it was. I mean, it was terrible. We didn't know what was happening. You know, we didn't know how long I was going to be held. We didn't know that at one point they were telling me that we would have to pay for the TV before they would release me, which was impossible because I would have to get out to get the money together to get the TV more than likely. So, you know, and we are. For those of you that don't know the story, you know, I just came out of a long illness, and then we immediately had this opportunity to do this retreat, but we're doing it by the skin of our teeth. And even though the whole country was shut down last month, we still have to pay all the overhead. So, you know, I just couldn't afford to be in an Ecuadorian jail. I don't know that anyone can. There's one guy that was in there, man, that's going to be in there for 20 years, and I just can't imagine because there's nothing to do, and you only leave the group cell long enough to go to the lunch line or breakfast or dinner, whatever meal it is, and back, and you do it quickly, because they have to lock all the prison because the jail's in the prison, so the jail's inside of the prison, and then they have to put all the prisoners away, let the jail inmates out to go to get the food, and then you have to hurry back in there. So every 5 or 6 hours, you come out and go right back in, and that's it. And I'm just trying to imagine this poor guy doing this for 20 years. He's only 28 years old. Absolutely horrific. No, Mr. Charles, I do not see a question from you. No, I don't have top chat, super chat, none of that stuff. I can't because I'm demonetized. I'm demonetized, you guys. Send me millions of dollars. Like, seriously, somebody sent a Twitch gamer $1 million donation. This is cooler than that. So if any of you guys happen to be billionaires, I mean, it seems worthy. Yeah. Enrica definitely is a legend. You know, she definitely has an unorthodox life. That's for sure. High doses of cannabis as a psychedelic. Okay, there we go. Drug burnout. High doses of cannabis as a psychedelic. It's one version of that for sure. I mean, high doses of pretty much anything becomes psychedelic. I mean, when I was younger and I was still taking opiates, you know, in my early 20s, if you took enough fentanyl, you would have something like a psychedelic experience. Probably just because you were nearly dead. But you know, I think the best way to understand it's not these compounds. It's not like when you put a CD in a CD player and the laser's reading a disc. That's not what happens when you take a psychedelic. You know, the experience does not actually come from the drug. The drug is a gateway to the experience. The drug changes the station. It was actually Aldous Huxley. People credit Terence McKenna a lot with having said this originally, but it was actually Aldous Huxley. Okay, yeah, all right. I'll look on Facebook and I'll get your question because it's not allowing me to see it. That's really weird. I wonder what the reason is for that. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the reducing valve in our consciousness, and so these compounds turn down that reducing valve so that we are able to perceive more of the universe. So cannabis does that in its own way. I think that the issue with cannabis as, you know, super high dose psychedelic is that there's an entourage effect with all of the different cannabinoids that are present, and so um, for me, I don't like the consciousness distorting, the awareness distorting aspect of it. When you take ayahuasca, for example, at least my brews, you're still pretty much crystal clear. You're in the same exact state of mind, more or less, than you are when you're in your normal state. It's just, it's more like you have hit a button in an elevator and you've gone to another dimension. It's not like being intoxicated. And so cannabis isn't like that. And I think that actually detracts from the usefulness of it, at least for me, for my purposes. You know, when I take a psychedelic like LSD, for example, it's usually to enhance my ability to improvise on the guitar or to perform or to sing or something. And so, you know, if the dose is too high, then it becomes counterproductive. And, you know, so things that are actually like incapacitating, in my opinion, are not the best choice if you're trying to accelerate your journey into higher states of consciousness. Um, Cannabis creates a very expansive state of consciousness. If LSD contracts the mind, then marijuana expands. I don't know if that's the best analogy. Actually, mescaline is more of a contraction, I think. Um, but yeah, that's you know, I don't like the 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 feeling of confusion and anxiety and the inability to think clearly and concisely that comes from cannabis. But certainly at high doses, it's a psychedelic. Um, Now, why would this question not come in the chat? It says, what do you think of the idea that the elites have intentionally suppressed the feminine aspect of reality and all things inside of it? Um, well, when? At the current juncture, I think that they seem more interested in suppressing the masculine, but I think that has more to do with the sort of short-term goal than a long-term goal. Um, but yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most powerful bits of insight that I've received in regards to that was from our last guest at the retreat. Um, you know, we were talking about how race relations are intentionally agitated by the elite, and that movements like BLM are designed to actually instigate racial tensions under the guise of alleviating them, right? They're supposed to be civil rights movements, but they're actually psyops that are designed to to increase tensions between races. And also, some of the martyrs that were chosen, African American martyrs, were chosen because they were the worst possible candidate for martyrdom, which of course incites the right, and you know, it's just all a big mess. So we were talking about that, and he mentioned that, you know, well, what about the divide between male and female, and the way that they have, you know, culturally created this huge rift between and resentment, and you know, and discouraged like genuine connection. And you know, if you look at the popularity of or the boom in popularity of hip hop in the 90s that totally demeaned women, and the sort of divine connection between the masculine and the feminine was definitely something that was made into a sort of cultural joke. It was lame and you were weak and uncool if you were romantic. And even outside of the hip hop culture, there was the same sort of movement almost towards stoicism in that regard, or anti-romanticism at least, uh, in the white culture, just as a sort of byproduct of like, you know, reductionist, rational um, materialism. You know, it's sort of stripped that sort of romantic, divine, well, taking the divine out of the equation, you know? How can you have a divine connection with a member of the opposite sex if you don't believe in divinity? So, you know, there are a number of levels, I think, to that. Mixing serotonergic hallucinogens, a great idea. Absolutely phenomenally good idea. LSD and MDMA together are the absolute. If I could only have that forever, I would eschew ayahuasca and mushrooms and everything else. The combination of MDMA and LSD for me as a musical performer is absolutely and for sex. That's just the absolute greatest thing that can possibly be done. Um, so, so that's my feeling about that. Um, no, I have not ever tried any of the weird forms of DMT. The only contact that I've had with some of these sort of analogs, I guess, of DMT are 5-HO DMT that is found in the Wilca seed, which is similar to the Sebel or Yopo seed. And 5-HO DMT is a lot more vomiting and a lot less tripping. So if that sounds like a good time to you, then you might want to try it out. Uh, Ketamine is indeed a dissociative, but it is far more complex and interesting than a dissociative like PCP. It's definitely not the same sort of territory at all. And you know, I've actually administered it as part of like ketamine therapy for people that suffer from addiction. And the last person that I gave it to said, anyone that does this recreationally is fucked up in the head. And I would agree that it is just absolutely unpleasant. And I don't see why anyone would do it to abuse it. I find it extremely weird and extremely unpleasant. And, well, not extremely unpleasant, but unpleasant enough to discourage regular use. But it is extremely interesting, and I've heard a lot of stories of success of people basically re-engineering their consciousness so that they no longer have PTSD after a single experience. There's one really extreme case, this girl that had PTSD so bad that she couldn't like leave the house. She had, you know, I don't know what to call it, fits, I guess, every 15 minutes or something. I mean, she was a really, really extreme case. And so she took a really, really high dose of ketamine, and she said she suddenly found herself in a room that was like white light basically, except that there were these puzzle pieces, and she understood that the puzzle pieces were her disordered consciousness, and that if she just put them together in the right order, that she will have reconstructed her psyche so that it was healthy again and she would no longer have PTSD. So she put the puzzle pieces together, the ketamine wore off, and she never ever had another episode of PTSD again. And this was 5 years ago. Yeah, well, doing a lot of DMT is definitely I mean, I don't know what you mean by a lot of DMT, but you definitely can do too much and find yourself walking between worlds to an extent that can be overwhelming. So you might want to be careful with that. Although, you know, I have to say this about ayahuasca. I know people that have drank ayahuasca. Oh, I did the math on how many cups it would be over the years. But let's say, you know, this one guy, the Shuar tend to drink a whole lot of ayahuasca when they drink, and he's been a facilitator for 10 years, does quite a lot of ceremonies. And then the Shuar also have this, like, sort of initiatory, uh, I guess you could call it a holiday, where is a huge quantity of natum, which is very similar to ayahuasca. It's a Shuar version of ayahuasca that is consumed in huge quantities over the course of several weeks. And Point being that there's nothing wrong with these people after just, I mean, incredible quantities of ayahuasca consumed over years and years and years. And it also alkalizes the stomach in such a way that when you vomit, you don't end up with your stomach acids eroding your teeth. No, Mr. Charles, it does appear that you are being censored. But it is 10 o'clock, which means I've been talking for a while and bugs are starting to bite me. I'm outside in the Amazon rainforest at the moment, just casually sitting around in a t-shirt with very thin socks, and they're starting to bite through my socks. So I'm over it. Um, yeah, that's crazy, Mr. Charles, that you're making comments that are not coming through because that makes me wonder how many other people ask me questions that I never see. Um, it's actually kind of disturbing. But for everyone that is just joining, man, people just keep jumping on here. Okay, a couple more questions, man. If you guys can put them in there before I finish this tasty beverage, I'll sit here for a minute. Have I tried an MAOI with DMT? Well, that's what ayahuasca is. Um, but yeah, and actually, I have created my own type of changa with a plant called bobinsana, which is it was my son's like second word and certainly his first word with more than one syllable. He By the time he was 18 months old, he could identify ayahuasca, bobinsana, whole bunch of. He could pick plants that he could eat from the jungle and be trusted not to eat anything he wasn't. Never ate anything you shouldn't, and he'd come out of the jungle with food all the time. We have a little chunk of jungle right in the backyard, so I'm not saying I was letting him like wander off into the jungle by himself, but this little patch of jungle has a few things you can eat, and he would get them and bring them out. So anyways, bobinsana has a very special, I have a very special relationship with it. It's in the mimosa family. My mom's favorite flower was a mimosa. It was always my favorite flower when I was a kid. Some of you guys might know it as the Persian silk tree. It's a very heart-opening medicine, and it contains harmalas that are similar to those that are found in ayahuasca. So I make changa with crystal DMT with ayahuasca leaves, and then you know how people would like roll fingers of hash and put them in joints? I create a paste from the bobinsana and then roll a finger of it and put that in the middle of the joint and roll it up, and that's how we consume changa. And sometimes if I have a group that I know is experienced and stable, we'll actually have some of that bobinsana changa after the ayahuasca ceremonies while the medicine is still working. So yeah, it's vivid, let's put it that way. Um, Curious but hesitant about trying mushrooms for the first time. Get the dosage in the sweet spot. If you take too little, it may just be kind of physically annoying, and then you won't really be inclined to do it again. If you eat too many, you can have a meltdown, and then you're never going to want to touch any psychedelic ever again. So you have to find the sweet spot. Depending on what type of mushrooms it is, if we assume cubensis, I would say roughly about 2 grams is going to be pretty comfortable for just about anyone. Um, I, I really don't think that's going to be overwhelming for most people, but it's also not going to be so mild that you're going to be bored and just feel kind of weird. You know, it'll be a worthy experience. So, another thing about mushrooms is that the duration of the effect isn't very long. So it's not like you're gambling 12 to 18 hours like you would be with LSD or San Pedro or mescaline or something. Um, and if you just get online and look around, the overwhelming majority of experiences are positive. And if you're looking at it in terms of risk versus benefit, certainly with the effect on depression and the enhancement of memory, the ability to fight Alzheimer's and dementia off, to rejuvenate brain cells that have been damaged by alcoholism or depression. You're really not rolling the dice too much out of your favor. It's pretty much totally in your favor. You really can't go wrong eating psilocybin mushrooms. There are so many benefits, and even there are neuroinflammation benefits. There are inflammation in general. There are harmala alkaloids that are beneficial that have recently been discovered in psilocybin mushrooms. There are varying quantities of different harmalas and different strains of mushrooms. But you know, I mean, it's just so overwhelmingly beneficial that I don't really see what the hesitation would be. I think for a lot of people, if you're maybe older and you sort of intuitively know that your neural pathways are sort of etched in stone at this point in your life, and you have had a very rigid ontological position, or maybe you're religious. You know, your religion hopefully will be destroyed by this experience, and certainly your beliefs about the universe. You know, I mean, it's a threat to an atheist as well, because I think that optimally what happens is that if you're religious, your religion gets eroded and you become spiritual, and if you're an atheist, you become spiritual. Atheism is your religion in such a case. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many overwhelmingly positive possibilities. I don't really see what the hesitation is um, for people. Oh, Kinsho, you haven't heard the mayonnaise in the TV story yet. Look for the video. I told the story. There's a thumbnail where I'm like in a prison with my hat on. uh, well, see, it doesn't help to. Oh no, Huxley had done LSD well before his deathbed, but he also did it on his deathbed. He asked for an injection of 250 micrograms or something like that. It could have been 500. I can't remember. But it definitely wasn't his first experience. Um, in fact, Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, Allen Ginsberg, and I can't remember who else. Huxley, Leary, Ginsberg, a couple other guys. There was like this group of like elite intellectuals that would meet and try to figure out what to do about psychedelics. And Huxley's position was antithetical to Leary's, where Huxley was saying we need to keep this quiet, only give it to academics and artists and politicians, and because if it leaks out into the proletariat, they're going to freak out, and the government's going to ban it, and it's going to be a big problem. And Leary was like, "Fuck that! We need to get everyone on Earth high on LSD. I need to go." You know, he was a Harvard. He wasn't a professor, but he was a Harvard psychologist or psychiatrist. Psychiatrist, I think. One of the two. Either psychologist, not psychiatrist. Head of the board of something for psychology at Harvard, whatever. Actually, Jordan Peterson has the same position at Harvard, or he did. Um, so we all know what happened after that. Um, I don't think that's true, Balanced Shez. I think a lot of people blame Leary for how getting LSD banned. But what actually happened is that there was a different group of researchers that had been commissioned by the federal government in the United States to do research on psychedelics. And so they sent their research to the White House or whoever it was that was going to review it. And they said, like Dr. Humphrey Osmond, for example, I think is the exact quote was, these compounds can cure potentially every known psychological aberration, oftentimes in a single dose. And so, you know, the government, the White House, whatever, called up Big Pharma and said, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And they said, "Send ninjas with guns and shut this shit down now." And so within like 48 hours of sending their reports to the White House or whoever it was in the government that was to review it, they sent armed soldiers down and told them to shut down the research, and they banned psychedelics right away. So no, I don't think it was because of the hysteria of Leary or any of that. The government actually knew exactly what psychedelics could do, what they were for, and the potential to re-engineer consciousness and for people to rewrite their own programs, and that's what they were threatened by. In fact, if you were caught with more than a certain amount of LSD, you were charged with attempting to undermine the government, which is basically treason. So that's pretty wild. Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, no, everything was already illegal. Reagan just made it more aggressive, the drug war. But yeah, they basically, and it's tricky what they did because they couldn't actually. No, it was before Nixon even. I mean, okay, the new stuff, but they had already made marijuana, heroin, cocaine, all of those type of drugs, with the exception of alcohol, illegal a long time ago. And it started with the Marijuana Tax Act. And the reason it was a tax act is because it is not constitutional to make drugs illegal in the United States. And actually, the constitutional amendment, I can't remember where it is, maybe the third one or something. It actually says that the citizens can choose to use any drug they want for any purpose that they deem necessary. So it explicitly implies, at least, that they could use them recreationally, medically, whatever, and it's none of anyone's business. And so, because of that, the federal government couldn't outright ban drugs. They made these tax stamps, and so it was so prohibitively expensive to pay the tax on, say, a kilo of marijuana. So it was like $10,000 if you want to legally possess a kilo of marijuana. But a kilo of marijuana has never been worth anywhere near $10,000. So it's just, not practical to pay the tax and legally possess the drugs. Um, yeah, and I mean, it's interesting that you say that you bought mushrooms legally in DC because um, DC is under the jurisdiction of federal law, and they still have not changed the federal law. So I think that the legality of mushrooms in DC is still got to be a gray area. I'm not sure how they did that because DC's got some weird stuff going on with the way the law is structured there. Um, but it is too late. I've been talking forever. Thank you guys so much for joining me for this time. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon. We're demonetized, so we get nothing for our efforts. And there's all sorts of options to support us in the description. And if you're interested in studying Hermetic magic and plant medicine, you can come down here and see me in Ecuador. Good night.